afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Assessment Reform Week, The Essentials. And this is the subject session for history. My name's Katie Hall, and I'm the History and Politics subject lead.
Afternoon, lovely to have you all with us. Like Katie said, welcome. My name is Teni Gogo, and I am the History sector lead.
So, as Tony said, it's great to have you all here this afternoon, and thank you very much for making a history appointment before the football. It'd be really great if you joined us on the Slido link. So there's a chance to ask some questions there, and there's going to be some polls. If you're on a mobile device, you can join using that QR code. I think also we might be able to put it in the chat, but I think the easiest way to do that is to join using that QR code. So you can come and join us on the Slido, and there'll be some points where we launch polls and where we also ask you for questions. But if you've got any questions as you're going along, please put them in there, and we will have a section on questions a little bit later on. So, as I said, welcome to Assessment Reform Week. If this is your first event of the week, then that's great. If you've been to any of the others, I hope you've enjoyed them, and you can go back and look at some of those. So the idea of this week is to talk to you through everything you need to know all together in one place. This is a dedicated week, and we're going to explore what these changes mean for learners, for subjects, and to schools. So you can see what's happened so far this week and what's coming up. So on Monday, we looked at what is reform and what does it mean for me. So there was a kick-off webinar with some of the key people at AQA looking at what is assessment reform and how it's being shaped. Yesterday, there was a really key video podcast which was looking at what reform means for your schools. And there were some conversations with school leaders there about what really matters, what they want from assessment reform. And then today, people are in subject sessions across the country. Lots of subjects at AQA are running sessions live right now, so welcome to the history one. Tomorrow, there are also sessions on what do I need now? So there's a kind of support, my AQA, data insights and trainings. If you're not up to speed on any of those, please come along tomorrow and have a look at them. And then on Friday is how can I get involved? So we're going to be at the Festival of Education on Friday, and AQA will be there, and you can hear about teacher panels. You can also join the live feed, hear about all the experiences there. And these will also be uploaded to YouTube very soon, so you can come back and watch things that you've missed. You can come back and watch this session, all of that. So this is really designed to be a kind of interactive week that you can keep revisiting and you can revisit with your colleagues. So first of all, a little bit more about assessment reform, and I'll hand over to Teni.
So you are obviously all here to talk about assessment reform in the context of history, but we're going to just firstly walk you through a bit of a bigger picture so you understand where we're at, how things are working. Some of you might have seen similar things before, but just so that we're all on the same page when we jump specifically into what history looks like. So the educational reform is underway. There are some headline changes that were announced in the CAR that was published towards the end of last year. So we know, and you would have seen so many times the phrase evolutionary, not revolutionary. There is a big push towards reduced exam time across different subjects. There is a bigger emphasis on financial education, a diverse and inclusive curriculum, looking at triple science, digital skills, oracy, creativity, a rethink of how resits work, but also coursework and NEA, which we know is a big conversation. Now, in the process of moving between CAR and reform being enacted in schools with you seeing new specifications and subjects and so on, the point that we're at is we have seen and we know that the DfE is starting to draft subject content, and AQA is engaging with Ofqual around those assessment arrangements. However, what we don't know is the timing of these consultations and the subject in each phase. So we don't know exactly when certain things are going to be happening. We know that there will be phases of subjects, which is on the next slide, I think. We do know that they will be introduced in phases. So we do know that there'll be a phase 1 and phase 2 of GCSEs, and those same subjects will sit in phase 1 or phase 2 of A levels. We do know that it will be staggered from Key Stage 3 to Key Stage 4 to Key Stage 5, but beyond this timeline, we don't quite have the specifics. So we know that the consultation has started. in terms of examples working with the DfE. But in terms of public consultation, we know that for the first group and Key Stage 3, we'll see that in September. We know that we expect to see the final curriculum published in 2027 and the first teach of that new curriculum in September 2028. That will then be followed by the first phase of GCSEs in 2029, the second phase of GCSEs in 2030, and then it will follow on from there. But this is all very generic stuff, hopefully stuff you've seen before. Hopefully this isn't anything entirely new to you, but just so you get an idea of where we're working at in terms of the information that's been shared and released that we can then share with you. But I will hand back to Katie.
Okay, so if we start to think a little more about history specifically, I think we're ready to launch our first poll. So right now, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you understand about what assessment reform could mean for you? And you can take part in that poll on the QR code again through the Slido.
I've got some responses coming in, so I'm just going to share that with you.
Thanks, Marie. Okay, so that's really interesting. We've got a lot of people that are kind of in the middle. On 3, we've also got a lot of 1s and 2s. That's really expected at this stage. And I think if you are kind of recording those responses, I think this is the reason you're here. So congratulations for taking the first step to say, like, I don't know what's going to happen and I'm not very confident. So because these kind of sessions are really to kind of sort that out and to help you know more about that. And this is just the first in a lot of sessions that AQA are going to run to help support you with that. And we're going to be needing you as well and to talk to you. Okay.
So we've asked you that question, not just to leave you in the lurch and for everyone to say, I'm not confident, and then it's home time. We have said all of this, that now we can hopefully unpack a little bit more as to what this means specifically for history. And it can kind of be summarized into 3 clear things. So the first thing is greater accessibility. We know that history is seen as quite a difficult subject. In certain contexts, if you're not seen to get a particular grade, then you might even be discouraged from doing it. We know that this reform is aiming to look at that and challenge that and make history truly a subject for all. It also means a review of the assessment. Both the CAR and the government response acknowledge that our current assessment structure, our model, the one that's existed since 2015, is no longer fit for purpose. So what we do expect is a review of the assessment. And we also expect to see a broadening of narratives. Both the CAR and the government response acknowledge that the way that British history or history more broadly has been defined isn't as inclusive as it should be. So there has been an acknowledgement that this review, this reform should see the history that comes out of the other end more representative of the inherent diverse nature of history, specifically looking at the inherently diverse nature of British history. Now, we have kind of pulled away some of these key themes, what the CAR, what the reform means for history, what the types of areas of change that we should be looking at are. But we've also been working with some of you in teacher panels, which we'll get onto towards the end of this session. And we've been sending out some surveys, we've been getting in responses. And there are 3 key topics that have come back from what you said you'd like to see, what changes you feel you need, what's happening on the ground in classrooms, what's working, what isn't. And in light of those 3 big takeaways that we just mentioned, what should we be focusing on? And this is where we'd really like to see your feedback as we go through. So please do get involved. The first one is clear, simple assessment. So an assessment that is truly suitable for all. So this goes towards looking at history being accessible, like we just mentioned, but also an assessment review. So thinking about reviewing command words to ensure that they clearly signal the expectations that are placed on students. So if we say describe, we mean describe. If we say explain, we mean explain. If we say write an account, that's what we mean. So looking at the words and the language that we're using so that it doesn't feel like we're tripping students up per se. but also refining the number of question stems to reduce unnecessary cognitive load and improve clarity. So these are the two kind of key elements that have come back from a lot of what teachers have said. We'd really love to know whether these are things that you agree with, but also which aspects of our current assessment you feel students find most demanding. So I think Marie will correct me if I'm here, but you can just pop this in the chat. We will also have space at the end for questions if there's something that you'd like us to really unpack a little bit more towards that point in the afternoon. Oh, no, chat's been turned off. I lied. So we'll come back to that at the end.
Would you like the chat on? People are sharing questions in the Q&A through Slido. Would you like the chat on as well?
I think we keep it probably on Slido.
Yeah.
Shall we?
Should we keep it on Slido? We'll go through these points and then if the quicker we go through, the more time we have for questions.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So looking at the kind of next key theme and do keep putting your points in Slido. They can be questions, they can be kind of questions that masquerade as a kind of point if you want as well. The consistency, continuity and coherence across the curriculum. We're very interested in looking at progression through key stages. The curriculum assessment review is obviously not just a review of GCSE history or of A-level history, it's a review of the whole curriculum for all subjects, right from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 5. But we're really interested in, for history, making sure that there is that real progression, that it feels like from Key Stage 3 to 4 to 5, there is a real feeling of purpose and intent in that progression. And two of the things that when we talk to teachers, talk about a lot, we want to review the use of sources and interpretations to discourage rote learning and to promote that kind of authentic critical analysis. So lots of you that will have spoken to us before or spoken to networks in your area will talk about the sources and how we use sources, how we use interpretations. Is there something different we can do there? Is there something that could work better for teachers, work better for students, and also work better as a form of assessment? Is there something that could be more valid as a form of assessment? We also want to clarify and embed progression in the use of second order concepts. We have a lot of extended responses in our history GCSE, which lots of people feel is something we need to consider, but also something that is part of history. But actually, what is the progression of how does it look like for students when they're getting better at thinking about causation, or they're getting better at thinking about significance, and how does that work throughout Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5? So it would be interesting in the Slido and points, and we can come back to these in a minute. Where do you think alignment is really strong between key stages? Is there clear progression? Have you worked really hard on that? I know lots of departments that work really hard on thinking about how they progress from key stage 3 to 4 and on to 5. Is this something that's important, or is this something that you think actually no, there are more important things to look at in the review? Because at the moment we're at the beginning of this. So are the DFE, so are Ofqual, so are we. So this is your chance to kind of have those and say, well, yeah, I think this is really important, or this isn't. Moving on to our third theme then.
And third and lastly, assessing the right things. So we can see in the questions coming in on the Slido, there is so much about content. So that has come through numerous times, more than you can imagine. And so it's a call to address the content overload to support a manageable scope and reduce overall exam time. So we know that there is a lot. We've moved from where there was previously coursework that controlled assessment, and it moving to being 100% examined means that there is just so much to cover for the purpose of 2 exams with AQA, 3 if you're on another exam board. So that is something that has been acknowledged in both the CAR and the government response. So we hope that the review would then lend itself to a reduced amount of prescribed content. But in addition to this, revisiting the assessment model to better reflect the breadth and diversity of history as a discipline. So this builds on what Katie was saying about the incredible work being done at Key Stage 3, particularly with sources and interpretations, that sometimes doesn't feel like it progresses naturally into Key Stage 4 and then into Key Stage 5. But in addition to this, the review of the use of scaffolding to better support students in writing longer answers. So there's extended responses. Is there more that can be done to support students responding to those questions? So as the questions keep rolling in, if you could just think about where do you think the current model places the greatest emphasis in terms of skills? We know that some teachers have said that because of the time constraints, you're essentially testing how fast they could do certain things rather than the skill itself. If something that resonates with you, we'd love to hear more about that. So please do just let us know, what do you think in terms of assessing the right things? Is this something you agree with? Is this something that actually you think is maybe not as much of an issue as some of the other things we've highlighted? We'd really, really love to hear more.
Thanks, Teni. And just to say, yeah, I can see there's lots coming in on the Slido. So if you do see a question which is very like your question, you can give it a thumbs up, and that will put it towards the top, so that in a minute we will look at those questions. We'll try to answer as many as we can, but it definitely will kind of see. And as Teni said just now, there's a lot in there to do with content. This slide is really about the things that we're trying to influence. At the moment, we are at the beginning of this process, and as an awarding body, we don't have the power to change things without getting agreement from the DfE, without getting agreement from Ofqual. And lots of you will have seen the current subject content criteria for history. So it's really important that we are influencing and we're hearing your voices at this stage. At the moment, as Teni mentioned about teacher panels and other people we're talking to, teachers that we see all the time, people are telling us, as you are about to tell us very clearly, that a reduction in content is very important. We support that. We support the reduction in number of components, the number of studies, and or a review of the required time period. So a reduction in content could look lots of different ways. It could look like at the moment we have 5 studies at GCSE history. Do there need to be 5? What do each of them do that's special? Could we change that? But equally, we have studies that cover 1,000 years, studies that cover sort of 50 years, and then depth studies that cover a shorter amount of time. Are they the right amount of time periods? Could we look at those as well? So these are the things that we'll be talking to teachers about, but we'll also be talking to the DfE about and to Ofqual about. As Teni said, and that real greater coherence through key stages, so that lots of you, I know, will map learner journeys through school. What does that look like in history? How are those links from Key Stage 3 to Key Stage 5 really going to be sorted out? And then also that updated inclusion of sources and interpretations. So how can we really ask questions that are not about rote responses? How are they really going to encourage that disciplinary analysis and argument that, as Teni says, we know so many people do so well at Key Stage 3, and then at Key Stage 5 that's often done really well, but that can be improved. How do we make sure that, especially at GCSE, that's really strong? Okay, so I think what we're going to do now is we'll move to some of your questions. So I think Marie's going to show us what's been coming in and what's top of the pops at the moment.
Get ready. Okay. So because they've been coming in quite, throughout the whole session, you might have answered some of these already. Yeah. So we've got some very
we can answer
popular
them directly.
Ones.
There's probably more to say.
Yeah, we've got some very popular ones at the top.
Yeah, I have seen some that have got quite a few thumbs up. So
let me just. If you can read them, guys, do start just while I get the correct window for you.
With the that top one.
Yeah.
The biggest challenges one, or So biggest challenges being the sheer amount of content, too many types of questions. This is something that we agree with. It is something that we, like Katie said, we are trying to influence. The current state is, so there's the DfE where the subject content comes from, there's Ofqual where assessment things come from, and the current structure of assessment and the reason you see certain similarities across boards is because the prescribed content means we have to cover medieval, early modern history. So that results in a certain amount of content across the 5 components being quite overwhelming. But then from Ofqual and the assessment, because of the 4 assessment objectives, which each have their own substrands, which need to be met by a certain weighting, it means that you can't reduce the number of question stems below a certain number because it has to tick a certain box. So that's why you might have noticed all 3 boards have a write and account question because of the particular wording in the assessment objectives. It means that that question essentially has to exist. If you look at area 4 that says how and why interpretations differ, That is why across all the boards you have the how and why questions differ. So that's why it's really important to have your voice here when the consultation starts, that you're responding, that you're giving your feedback, because essentially if those certain things don't change from slightly above us, our hands eventually become tied and we just end up going into a new model where we say, yeah, actually, there's too many questions. But this is something that we want to really push to change. But again, that's why we're here. That's why we really, really do need your input.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll take the next one, shall I? So
Yeah.
I find students and teachers find the hoops to jump through to achieve level 4 complex thinking has never been fully explained. Can this be made clearer? I.e., in significance questions, they need to discuss long, short term, or politically economic. I think on a wider sense is a really good question, and I think we need to think about what those mark schemes look like, what that assessment looks like. You know, in those, you're talking about the significance question, that's an 8-mark question. Do we need to have 4 levels? Do we need to, does that work for students and teachers? And yeah, absolutely. When we talk about complex thinking, what does that really mean? And I think that will be something that our assessment teams will look really closely at. Obviously, we'll keep saying this is going to be our broken record thing, but we're at the very early stages of this. And as Teni suggested, there are some parameters, like as she's just said, in the current specs, there has to be a thematic study, there has to be a period study. There are some parameters that we can't set out. We can influence the DfE to do what we think we should, and so will other awarding bodies, but we can't do that ourselves. But when it comes to what mark schemes look like, we have to do some of the things that Ofqual says, but I think you're right, that we can think more about that. So I think, yeah, that kind of assessment, does it need to look the same, is a really interesting one.
The next one's quite similar to the one I had before, so I'll touch on that quickly and then I'll answer the one about making history more accessible. In terms of the reduction of content, how will it impact on the types of study? We don't know. It's kind of like what Katie said earlier. This isn't something that's confirmed. This is something that will come through consultation. This is something that when they put out the draft model, we'll see, okay, this is how the curriculum drafters and DfE have decided to address the reduction in content. It might be that all 5 types of study are still available, but they're slightly smaller. It might be that they reduce it to 4, or reduce it to 3, or come up with a new structure entirely. But that is something that we'd be looking to influence, to talk about. But ultimately, the goal is a reduction in content. But again, that is how it's reduced is equally as important. But the bigger question in terms of making history more accessible, entry-level questions, low marks and less extended writing, that is one way of making history more accessible, but we have to consider the implications of certain types of questions, because certain lower tariff questions are more difficult for students, because yes, they look smaller, but they're actually more specific and niche in terms of knowledge. So sometimes a broader question is easier for students that find learning harder, because there's more that they can write about. And sometimes those smaller questions look more appealing and seem easier, but if there's 4 1-mark questions and you don't know any of the answers, we've not necessarily fixed the issue. So it's just figuring out the balance of ways of making history accessible that actually give access to a wide variety of students with an increasingly diverse set of needs.
Okay, we probably have talked about the content one quite a lot, but I actually think the one below on women I'll take, because it kind of relates to the content one, and I think it relates to diversity and more narratives, which we're really keen to. I think, you know, will women be included as essential rather than an afterthought? The initial report didn't see women as a diversity issue when there are no women in some exam specifications. You are correct, the person who answered that question, and we are very aware of some of our specifications which could easily include women, and so all of them could and do not. I often think of the health thematic, for example, but there are lots of other examples. I think, will it be included as essential? There are 2 stages of that. As we say again, we don't know what will come from criteria from government. Will there be certain things which are seen as essential? But equally, it will be down to exam boards, awarding bodies, to write specifications that look at that. Now, of course, it has a huge question to ask about content, because the content question is an easy one when we start to think about it, which says we want less content. And I think we can all agree that. Those of you who've been teaching for a while know that. However, when you start to think about what do you want to get rid of in order to put new things in, that's when probably, like, if you're in your department office, if you're in your staff room, because history is all we talk about, it'll be that's when you start saying, actually, well, I want this girl, I don't care about that, but someone else really does include that. So I think these are the discussions we're going to want you for in the next couple of years, because that will be really important at looking at what we do include and what we don't include. But definitely the idea is to say we want more and better narratives and more diverse narratives in all ways in a diverse issue.
I will take the next wonderful question about NEA and A levels. What is the future for NEA given the prevalence of the use of AI by students? In all transparency, that is something that is still being figured out, but it is a cross-curricular issue. AI has affected NEA in almost every subject that uses it, to differing degrees. And I think it's a case of figuring out how do we continue some degree of NEA because of the benefits of it in terms of leading on to higher education and the skills that it allows, while still mitigating or acknowledging the ways in which AI has affected the way that students use it. So it seems a bit of a non-answer, but essentially it is an issue that's been acknowledged, but it is an issue across subjects. So I think this isn't history specific. This is a conversation that we're having between different subjects to figure out, is there a solution across the board that this works for? There have been various suggestions that are made. Some people have suggested things like fevers, however you want to pronounce it. But that obviously works for smaller centres as opposed to further education centres. That'd be very difficult if you have 200 history students. So we're looking at different options, we're looking at solutions. But again, what the future of this looks like depends massively on the criteria that we're given once the consultation begins publicly. If from a government level they decide to move to 100% examination at A level, we can't then impose NEA as it exists now. So this is why it's a really important part of the consultation.
Great. Shall I take the interpretations one? I think, again, it's a really interesting question. I think this is one that fits in with the kind of progression idea. And we know that in the last 10 years, the way that interpretations are taught at Key Stage 3 has massively changed, has become much more widespread, that idea of using sort of what we might call real interpretations of constructed history by historians and popular interpretations. I think there was a really good reason that the interpretations on paper ones sometimes don't look like that, because they need to be accessible, they need to be there for students to use them from the period. This is also something that sits under the DfE's content criteria and the off-course assessment strategy. It's definitely something we want to look at. What we don't want to do, though, is start using interpretations that, okay, they might be from a history book, but can students interpret them? Can they use them? Can they understand them? And so I think, yes, that really goes into that question of how are we progressing from Key Stage 3? And the big thing to remember about this is, in our history classrooms that we've all had in the past, working with interpretations at Key Stage 3, you can do wonderful things. Can you do that in what will be a closed book exam where students have to deal with them? And that's a question that we always need to consider about assessment. But I think it's a really, really key issue, and one that we will continue to ask as we're influencing the DfE and also looking at our specification. Do you want to take the STEMS one, Teni? We sort of...
Yeah, we kind of touched the STEMS one. We would love for there to be, we would love to see a reduction of question STEMS at GCSE, but again, like we mentioned earlier, that is entirely dependent on changes in the assessment objectives and the strands that come under each of them. You have to have a certain percentage of each assessment objective across your assessment, which as it stands means that you can't actually reduce the question STEMS much further than they are now. And then if you do reduce them further, you then potentially risk creating questions that don't quite mean what they mean because you've tried to squash them into fewer question STEMs. So it just swaps one monster for another. But if ideally what the reform does is simplify those assessment objectives, then we could definitely look at reducing those question STEMs and reducing the cognitive load of the exam.
Another one about mark schemes. Will AQA be looking at mark schemes to make them clearer and easier to use? I think, yeah, that's always our goal. And I think that these mark schemes obviously been around for a while. We would want to make sure that they are clear and easy to use and they're accessible. Obviously, mark schemes relate very closely to the assessment strategy. So sometimes they have to include certain things. So no matter what awarding body you are, their mark schemes will be checked and verified by Ofqual. They have to fit in with the way that mark schemes should look. Sharing more sample answers. Yes, we do have lots of sample answers and we do try to update them as often as we can. In something like history, where we've got lots of different options, it can be difficult. But we are always looking to share more things. And in the last couple of years, we've obviously shared answers and commentaries from the 2018 and the 2019 historic environment that we could, because we're now rotating the historic environment. So we will continue to do that as much as we can. And I also think it's always worth looking at those sample answers across different options, even if it's not your option, because actually the way that answers are constructed, they share the same generic mark scheme. But yeah, it's a really good point. I think something we would be looking at doing in a reformed qualification.
The next one, historical sites aren't always places that can be visited and are seen as largely pointless. So I think the historic environment is one of the more difficult components, I think, to introduce. The idea is that local history to some degree was kept in the structure, was kept within GCSE history, because it is acknowledged as a really important part of history, having that local, national, international perspective. The reality is it's quite difficult to enforce at a national level, especially with as many centres doing history as there are now. In an ideal universe, it would be lovely if, I think one of the questions that popped up that might be lower down now, you could do your own local site study. But again, with that comes a much greater demand and workload on teachers, the moderation of it, ensuring that it's fair and valid, and the results are comparative across centres is an entirely different thing. So we are hoping that when they look at reducing the content or changing the content, that maybe the incorporation of local history looks slightly manageable and maybe more true to the discipline. But as we see, as Katie mentioned earlier, comparing it with interpretations is a weird comparison, but in the same way you have much more freedom at Key Stage 3 to look at local history in a really incredible way, you can look at interpretations because you have all this time to unpack the content and the history and the context and all of that. The context of a closed book exam makes those things slightly more superficial, and I think it is a completely valid point, and it's something we'd want to try and make more authentic at the next reform.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I think about the sort of visiting thing, I mean, it's really important. There's no requirement to visit anywhere, but it's that, you know, I'm very old now. 20 years ago when I was teaching, you know, those things were done in coursework or in NEA. And again, because we talked about other issues about AI with that's probably something that people wouldn't want to be reintroduced. So it's all about balancing that up. Question stems. I'm just going to look at that quickly. I might, and then I'll answer the multiple choice one as well, maybe. Yeah, source analysis. Yeah, thank you. And I think we will, it's definitely within that discussion of sources and what are the best questions to ask about sources? How do we ask them? How can students work with sources and interpretations? Just to go on to the one about multiple choice questions, I think it's really interesting about other subjects. As Teni suggested earlier, the multiple choice debate is fascinating because there can be a misconception, a bit like 1 mark answer questions, so that makes it really easy for kids because they only have to do a 1 marker. I think multiple choice questions, if they are well written, can be amazing. If you've got good distractors, and it's worth, if you're interested in this, it's worth reading some of the research in America about some of the states that use multiple choice questions. What we do see again and again, and we have a research team and an assessment research team, is that actually multiple choice doesn't necessarily mean easier, and it doesn't mean that kids are getting more marks. So it's something that we would be open to looking at. It's not something that we would put off the table. Within history Ofqual requirements previously, that's not been something which is really available, but I think it's about being led by the good history and being led by things which are truly accessible, so that all students have a good go at doing them. And as Teni said before, that idea that sometimes having a broader question which allows you to maybe write about lots of different things you might know, and actually it can be better. Yeah, so probably those top two we've done. Teni, do you want to have a look at that one?
Sorry, I misread that one. I'd love the questions to actually ask what they want done. Yes, I agree. But this is where it comes back to the review of assessment objectives, and we need those to be simpler. If those are simpler and have less hoops to jump through, we will be able to just say, explain why X happened, describe what this source tells you about. Do you find source A or B more convincing about? The wording and the phrasing is, I know sometimes it can seem like somebody just plucked some words out the sky and chucked them in an exam, but it is often because of the way that the assessment objectives themselves are phrased, but also the strands within them. So it would be wonderful if that was the way forward. But again, what we require for that is more straightforward assessment objectives. But this is something, like Katie mentioned, it is what we are pushing for, it is what we want to encourage, and it is what we'd love to see you also sharing once we reach the public consultation point.
There's been a few, I've seen the words write an account quite a few times, which doesn't surprise me at all. And I think it's a really good example. I think write an account is there because it has to be there in the subject content criteria in 2014. There is a requirement for students to look at narrative history. Now that is something that it might be, and we don't know yet. We haven't seen a draft. We don't know when the draft will be published. That might not exist. It might exist. It might exist in a different form. At that point, that idea of narrative history was really important within the kind of discussion around history teaching. You're right in some ways that sometimes the second order concept is unclear, but that idea that students should be able to write a narrative, I think this is the kind of things, and I think I saw one flash somewhere about saying, oh, are we going to be asked about this? Absolutely, as we've said, this is just the beginning of you being asked about this. So yeah, we do know about the write an account question. There are those types of questions in every history specification because they are included in the content criteria. So we will look at that and hopefully make that clearer.
Thank you. I'll take those next two questions together. History should take from other subjects, including multiple choice, particularly for lower prior attaining EAL and SEN students. Do you agree? And then I believe simple knowledge retrieval questions as entry-level questions can increase accessibility for lower prior attaining students. Can this be considered? Yes, it is something we are looking at. It's something we've kind of touched on earlier. It's what Katie mentioned earlier, that we have a research team that looks at all of these things. But we have to consider the different number of centres that take things. And if you gave one student in one school a multiple choice question or simple knowledge retrieval questions from another centre, those will be focused on details that might not have been picked up elsewhere. So if we are going to move towards that, and it is something that we want to do because we do want to make sure that our papers are accessible as possible, we just want to be careful that those lower tariff questions, those simple knowledge retrieval questions, are truly reflective of knowledge that all students should have across the specification. Because as you know, when you start getting really niche questions, you'll think, well, I only spent one lesson on the Falklands War and all of those small entry questions are about this and they don't even know what date it was. So we just need to be really careful when we're looking at ways to make it more accessible for students. Every subject is different, the discipline is slightly different from different subjects, and just adding a multiple choice doesn't necessarily do the work that we need. If we're talking about students that struggle to read, the multiple choice questions can be longer and can take longer to read than certain other questions, but because it might only be 1 or 2 marks, they won't have very long to read it and make an informed choice. So we just need to make sure that we're not making superficial changes that don't actually impact the students positively.
So this one, I think the next two are kind of about sort question types as well. So write an account, source-based questions, why can't they be told? That convincing question, which question 3 in paper 1 I know is one I get talked about to me all the time. I think we're right. We've had these questions for a while. Some of them have proved to be more challenging than we expect. Some of them have proved to be continuously challenging. These questions do exist for a reason. They exist because of Ofqual accreditation, and that we need to show, as Teni has said, that We are making sure we cover all of the assessment objectives, that we're covering the different strands of the assessment objective. So the convincing one, particularly, that question 3 is about kind of, evaluating and testing those interpretations. That's one of the strands of AO4. So how that looks and how it can be made to look better, yes, there will be better ways for it to look. Of course, it will depend what the assessment objectives look like in any reformed qualification and what the criteria looks like. So absolutely, these things are absolutely up for debate and up for discussion with our assessment experts, with our many teachers that mark for us, that set papers for us, and of course with you teachers about what you think should be there and what might work better instead. So I think, I think the top one and the third one that's showing at the moment, Marie, we've probably done.
Pretty similar. Should I take one more and then it is
and then we should
4:42? Just to say that if you have questions here that we haven't answered, please don't worry. We will be able to, they will stay up. We will be able to have a look at them. We can look at putting together an FAQs document that we put out, so your question is still answered. Yes, there's one about historic environment, so hopefully we can just put that one into the FAQs and deal with that one as well. I think the current GCSE puts students off A-level history. It seems so needlessly complicated. I would like to see a simplification of GCSE so there's time to enjoy the course and content. I want my students to see history the way that I do. This goes directly into what we were saying about curricular progression. We really don't want GCSE to be this weird kind of outlier in the work that's done at Key Stage 3 and the work that's done at Key Stage 5. We want it to be a really natural progression. We want there to be space to enjoy the subject. We want there to be space for you to get back into the nitty-gritty bits of history and the contested bits and the debates, and teach them how to answer questions or write those extended responses, not because you're teaching to the exam, but out of a love and enthusiasm for the subject and wanting to communicate some of those really key ideas. So the very last thing we're going to do, and then we'll just have a few takeaway bits, is we just love to hear from you now. One more poll. How clear are you now on assessment reform and what that can mean for you? So one last poll, and then we'll have some wrap-up bits from Katie.
I have launched the poll. Would you like it displayed, or are you happy just to see it yourself?
Great, thanks, Marie. If we can have it displayed.
Yeah, sorry.
Can you see anything?
Not yet, Marie.
I can see people talking. Let's try. I can see people typing. Yes, there you go. Sorry about that. There you go.
Lovely. We've got at least a 4. We're getting more confident. So yeah, we're really glad that hopefully you have a bit of a clearer idea of the steers at reform, what that's going to mean for history. Essentially, we're looking at an assessment review, so it's not so complicated, so that it's not putting them off doing A-level and they're able to really access that assessment. We're looking at a reduction in the content, but also just making it more accessible. Those are kind of the key highlights that we're looking at. What that means in terms of different components, we will see when the draft comes out. We will be talking to you guys continually. There'll be more and more sessions like this, so we want to keep hearing from you. We want to hear your feedback as we get more information, as we can share more. We really do want to shape the future of history at AQA together. So the last thing before I think I go is, Katie, you've got one more final QR code for people.
Oh, I think, yes, I have. So this is one that doesn't, you can do this now, and you can sign up. You may already have signed up for our teacher panels. And I think those of you that are still saying, I'm in a kind of 2-3 place, that's completely fine. Don't panic. We're at the early stages of this, and we're here to help you through this. So Teni and I are leading Team History on this, and we really want to help you, but we want you to help us as well. We've had some amazing questions this afternoon, and I think the quality of the engagement is really strong. If you haven't joined our teacher panels, please use that QR code now. What that happens at the moment is that you get a monthly survey which asks you about all sorts of different things. It's not very long, takes 5 minutes. But as we get more into the consultation, we will be doing focus groups. We will be asking about subject content. We'll be asking about question types. We'll be asking about all those things you've discussed as well. And I saw some of the questions popping up on the slide at the end of people going, I love the historic environment. And that's going to be the discussion we're going to have as historians, like when we get into arguing about that. You can come and talk to your history team directly as well. You can phone or you can email history@aqa.org.uk. We are there and you'll be put through to us. And if you've got things you need to support with a GCSE, if you're still stuck with some things, come and ask us and we can help you as much as we can. And lots of people come and ask us all the time, and then there are some people who never talk to us, so it's lovely. We really like people to talk about us and talk to us. So thank you. We're only 1 minute over. Thank you very much for all your contributions. I've had a great time. Teni, pass to you.
Yeah, just to say thank you guys for coming. Please do sign up to the teacher panels. Please do stay in touch as we have more to tell you. We would love to have more afternoons like this, unpicking your brains. When we have an idea of what those new studies might look like, we'd love to talk to you about it. When we have an idea of what those new questions types might look like, we'd love to talk to you about it. So please stay in touch. Have a lovely evening, and thanks for joining us, even with the football on.